It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning, but then the pounding started. Not on the door, but on the walls of my life. 3 uniformed men stood at my porch, badges glinting under the sun, claiming to be neighborhood enforcement officers. They weren't police, yet they barked orders like they owned the block. My dog barked, my heart raced, and neighbors peeked from behind curtains as if this were a public spectacle. Their charge? A bizarre violation no one had ever heard of. Their threat? Immediate detention under HOA authority. Something inside me snapped. This wasn't just another petty notice about my lawn height. This was war on my freedom in my own home. And as their hands reached for me, they had no idea who they were really dealing with. What happens when an HOA crosses a line it can't uncross? First thing you'd notice about Maplewood Estates wouldn't be the houses, it would be the sound. There was a hush of sprinklers, the faint hum of lawnmowers, and the soft tick of bicycle spokes as kids looped the cul-de-sac before dinner. On the surface, it was a postcard neighborhood, tree-lined streets, identical mailboxes, freshly painted fences, and a community sign that boasted, "Where neighbors are family." For most people, that sign meant comfort. For Alex Carter, it meant he'd finally found a place to slow down. Alex had spent a decade moving from city to city, following promotions in an industry that chewed up his time and energy. When he and his wife, Sarah, bought the 2-story brick home on Willow Lane, it felt like an ending, a quiet chapter where their 2 young kids could grow up with bikes and lemonade stands instead of traffic horns and apartment elevators. Alex loved early mornings on the porch with coffee, watching sunlight slant through the oaks. In the evenings, he'd grill on the back patio, feeling like life had finally settled into something steady and predictable. The neighbors seemed friendly at first. Mrs. Albright next door left homemade cookies on the stoop. The retired couple across the street waved every time Alex drove by. The HOA newsletter was cheerful and bland, reminders about holiday decorations, community garage sales, and the upcoming summer barbecue. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. But Alex was observant by nature, a habit from years of corporate negotiations. He noticed the little undercurrents other people might miss. The way the HOA president, a tall man named Brent Lawson, spoke at community meetings, overly polite but clipped, like every question was a test. The way some neighbors hesitated before bringing up certain topics, lowering their voices when they did. And the rules, pages of them in the welcome packet, were strangely detailed. Lawn height measured to the inch. Approved paint colors in a binder of swatches. Even rules about what time of day trash cans could sit by the curb. At first, Alex dismissed it as a typical suburban structure. After all, rules kept neighborhoods clean, right? Yet there was something in the tone of those newsletters, non-compliance will result in action, that felt more like a threat than a courtesy. Sarah teased him for reading too much into it. "You've been in high-stakes negotiations for too long," she said, smiling. "This is just a neighborhood." Alex wanted to believe her. Still, every time he walked the block, he saw tiny cracks in the picture-perfect surface. A family 2 streets over had their swing set removed overnight. Unapproved structure. Another homeowner whispered about getting a fine for a flower bed that spilled 2 inches over the walkway. Alex tucked the stories away, curious but not alarmed. He was too busy painting his kids' bedrooms and setting up the grill. The first hint of friction came on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. Alex came home from work to find a folded notice tucked into his front door. At first glance it looked like junk mail, but the HOA logo on the header made him pause. The letter wasn't angry or accusatory, it was friendly, a courtesy notification about a potential violation. Apparently, the small flag he'd mounted on his porch wasn't on the list of pre-approved decorative items. Alex chuckled, more bemused than irritated. It was just a flag, navy blue with a simple geometric pattern, nothing offensive. He figured it was a misunderstanding. He sent an email to the address listed at the bottom, politely asking for clarification. He received no response. Days later, he noticed Brent Lawson pausing at his yard during an evening walk. The HOA president held a clipboard, scribbling notes while pretending to check his phone. Their eyes met for a brief second. Brent smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Alex felt a twinge of unease. He told himself not to overthink it. This was supposed to be his family's sanctuary, not another battlefield. But small things started piling up. A neighbor hinting he should be careful about changes to the property, a second newsletter emphasizing uniformity in community aesthetics, and an unexplained delay in the approval for a backyard shed he'd applied for. None of it was overtly hostile. Yet each tiny inconvenience felt like a breadcrumb leading somewhere Alex couldn't quite see. He began to sense a pattern, one where small rules could morph into weapons and friendliness could mask control. In the evenings, while Sarah read to the kids upstairs, Alex would sit on the porch scrolling through online forums about HOAs. The stories were eerily similar: petty fines, arbitrary enforcement, and power trips disguised as community standards. Most of them ended with frustrated homeowners paying up or moving out. A few escalated into lawsuits or public scandals. Alex wasn't a man who liked conflict, but he wasn't naive either. Years of navigating tense negotiations had taught him to see the opening moves of a power play. And the subtle signals from Brent and the HOA board were beginning to feel like the opening moves of something larger. He just didn't know yet what rule he'd break or how far they'd go to enforce it. From the outside, Maplewood Estates still looked like paradise. The lawns still glistened under sprinklers. The mailboxes still stood in neat, uniform rows. The community sign still read, "Where neighbors are family." But Alex was beginning to wonder, what kind of family rights rules this strict, and what happens when someone doesn't obey? That question lingered in his mind as he closed his laptop one night and heard footsteps outside his window. Slow, deliberate footsteps. When he looked out, the sidewalk was empty. Summer settled over Maplewood Estates like a heavy quilt. The sidewalks shimmered under the sun, kids' chalk drawings melted into pastel smudges, and the smell of cut grass hung in the air. For most residents it was the best season: block parties, community cookouts, and weekend swims at the shared pool. For Alex, it was proof that he'd done the right thing moving his family here. He could watch his kids pedal down Willow Lane, training wheels clattering, and feel a kind of peace he'd never known in the city. He poured himself into small rituals: morning runs past the Oaks, evening barbecues with Sarah, and weekend projects in the garage. Each gesture was a stake hammered into this new life, a quiet declaration that he belonged. But the deeper Alex settled in, the more he began to notice a pattern he couldn't unsee: the invisible hands that shaped every aspect of this perfect neighborhood. It wasn't just the newsletters anymore. It was the tone at the HOA's summer meeting held in the community hall. Brent Lawson presided from a raised platform like a judge, flanked by two other board members who never spoke. Residents sat in neat rows, murmuring softly, like students before a pop quiz. Alex had gone mostly to meet people, but what he heard sounded less like neighborly updates and more like directives: new parking restrictions, stricter trash bin hours, and a reminder that any decorative displays needed pre-approval. Each announcement came wrapped in polite language but delivered with an edge. When someone tried to ask why a rule had changed, Brent smiled thinly and pivoted to the next topic. Sarah squeezed Alex's hand under the folding table. "They're serious about this stuff," she whispered. Alex gave a small shrug, but inside he felt the old spark of alertness, the one that told him when a negotiation had hidden stakes. After the meeting, he lingered near the bulletin board. A neighbor named Carla approached, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid to be seen. "Watch out for Brent," she muttered, handing him a folded paper, a copy of a fine she'd received for unsightly garden ornaments. The ornament was a stone birdbath that had been in her yard for years. "They pick people," she said softly. "Once they start, it's hard to stop." Alex didn't know what to say. He'd read online about selective enforcement, but hearing it from a neighbor made it real. He tucked the paper into his pocket and walked his kids home under the flickering streetlights, feeling a ripple of unease. Back at his own house, the small inconveniences continued. His request for the backyard shed remained under review months after submission. Another courtesy notice arrived about the porch flag, this time not so friendly. A third letter warned of potential consequences if non-compliance persisted. Sarah rolled her eyes, but Alex could see her worry. "We moved here for peace," she said one night. "Why does this feel like we're being watched?" Alex began to test the boundaries quietly. He left the flag up. He planted a row of wildflowers just outside the official garden bed. He started documenting everything: dates of notices, copies of emails, even photographs of other houses with similar flags or plantings. He wasn't sure why he was doing it, only that his instincts told him to prepare. Yet daily life went on, at least on the surface. Saturday mornings were still for pancakes and cartoons with the kids. Sarah still organized playdates at the park. Neighbors still smiled and waved, though some smiles looked a little tighter now. And every evening, Brent's slow walks past Alex's property continued. Sometimes Brent stopped to write on his clipboard. Sometimes he simply stood at the edge of the lawn, staring as if measuring invisible lines. What unsettled Alex most was how normal it all looked. To an outsider, nothing was happening. No flashing lights, no public arguments. Just a homeowner receiving polite letters about small issues. But Alex had spent years reading between the lines of contracts, watching people telegraph their next moves without realizing it. And everything about Brent's behavior told him something was coming. The rules were not just rules, they were tools. And once someone decided to use them against you, every inch of your property became potential leverage. At night, when the house was quiet, Alex sat at the kitchen table scrolling through his phone. He found threads of people describing the same slow squeeze: letters, fines, escalating demands. Some stories ended in forced compliance. Others ended in dramatic confrontations or lawsuits. A few homeowners won, but only after years of stress. Alex wondered which path he was on and how far this HOA would go if he pushed back. He closed his eyes and tried to picture the life he wanted here: kids laughing in the sprinklers, barbecues with neighbors, and freedom to decorate his porch without scrutiny. But the image was starting to flicker, like a photograph left too long in the sun. And beneath the hum of the refrigerator, he swore he could hear footsteps outside again, slow and deliberate, like someone marking time. The next morning, a new envelope appeared in his mailbox. Not a notice this time, a summons to a compliance review meeting with the HOA board. No explanation, just a date, a time, and a warning that attendance is mandatory. Alex turned the paper over, reading it twice. His pulse quickened. This was no longer about a flag or a flower bed. This was the opening move of something bigger. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the growing file of documents he kept hidden in a desk drawer. Then he looked out the window at his perfect street: shimmering sprinklers, kids on bikes, neat mailboxes, and felt a strange mix of anger and resolve. He still didn't know exactly what rule he'd broken, but he was starting to realize that in Maplewood Estates, the real rule was power. And power was something he'd learned, long ago, how to fight. Dawn crept over Willow Lane in muted streaks of gray. The neighborhood still slept, sprinklers hissing softly like white noise. Inside the Carter home, the kitchen light glowed against the quiet street as Alex sat alone at the table. In front of him lay the compliance review letter, its formal tone colder now in the morning light. He traced the embossed HOA logo with his thumb and wondered, not for the first time, how a simple dream of stability had led here. Sarah padded in, hair loose from sleep. "You're up early," she murmured. Alex forced a smile, folding the letter away before she could read it. He didn't want to scare her. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Just thinking about work." It wasn't a lie exactly, his job still demanded him. But the real weight on his mind was the slow tightening of the neighborhood's grip, and the meeting circled on his calendar like a silent alarm. He looked out the window. Brent Lawson was already outside, walking his dog in a perfectly straight line down the sidewalk, clipboard tucked under one arm. Even at this hour, Brent moved like a man on duty. Their eyes met for a heartbeat through the glass. Brent raised a hand in a mock-friendly wave before disappearing behind a row of manicured hedges. Alex's stomach tightened. The day before the meeting, Alex tried to focus on normal life. He mowed the lawn, fixed the loose board on the back fence, and helped his daughter paint a cardboard rocket for a school project. The smell of cut grass mixed with craft paint, a reminder of what this home was supposed to be: a refuge, a laboratory for childhood, a place where small rituals could anchor a family. Yet every sound, every car door, every footstep set his nerves on edge. At the park, other parents chatted under the pavilion while their kids played. Alex noticed conversations stopping when Brent or one of the board members walked by. People's voices dropped, smiles stiffened. It was like watching a flock of birds change direction midair at the shadow of a hawk. When Brent was gone, chatter resumed, but never about the HO. The silence around the subject was louder than words. That night, after the kids were asleep, Alex sat with Sarah on the back patio. The crickets hummed, and the sky was a deep velvet blue. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. "Is it the job or?" She trailed off. Alex hesitated. He wanted to tell her everything, the notices, the meeting, the sense of being watched. But he also wanted to protect her from the stress. "It's nothing," he said finally. "Just a lot on my plate." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. "This is supposed to be our safe place," she whispered. The words landed heavy. Safe place. Later, alone, Alex opened his laptop and pulled up a map of the neighborhood. He began marking incidents he'd documented, dates of notices, Brent's walks, conversations with neighbors. A pattern emerged, houses targeted in a slow clockwise sweep around Willow Lane. Every family on that arc had received fines, warnings, or reviews. He felt a chill. Whatever game Brent was playing, Alex's house had been inevitable. The morning of the meeting, the sky was bright but brittle, the kind of light that makes everything look too sharp. Alex put on a pressed shirt, tucked the summons into a folder, and kissed Sarah goodbye. "I'll be back soon," he said, though he wasn't sure. The community hall stood at the center of Maplewood Estates like a courthouse. Its white columns and brick facade were meant to inspire pride. Today they felt like a warning. Inside, the hall was empty except for a long table at the front where Brent and two board members sat. No neighbors this time. Just Alex. The setup looked deliberate, like an interrogation. "Mr. Carter," Brent said, voice smooth. "Thank you for coming." Alex sat, laying his folder on the table. The chair scraped loudly on the polished floor. He felt like he was stepping into a script he hadn't read. Brent began with small talk about community values, about preserving harmony. But beneath the words, Alex heard the real message: compliance. He thought of Sarah and the kids, of the life he'd built here, and felt a flicker of anger. This wasn't harmony, this was control dressed up as community. He kept his tone polite, but his eyes stayed steady. Years in boardrooms had taught him that composure was power. The review ended without resolution. Brent handed Alex a list of required corrections to his property: flag removal, garden adjustments, and shed plans resubmitted with new fees. Failure to comply, the letter warned, may result in escalated action. Alex signed nothing, took the papers, and walked out into the sunlight. Behind him, he could feel Brent's gaze following. Back home, the kids were playing in the sprinkler, oblivious. Sarah stood on the porch, shading her eyes. Alex managed a smile, but inside a decision was hardening. He'd seen enough. This wasn't about a flag or a flower bed. It was about power, and power had rules of its own. He wasn't going to let his family be the next quiet cautionary tale whispered at block parties. That evening, as twilight deepened, he packed his folder of documents into a locked drawer. On the desk lay a blank notebook. He opened it and wrote 3 words at the top of the first page: "It starts now." Outside, the sprinklers hissed and neighbors' blinds twitched. Maplewood Estates still looked perfect, but Alex knew the picture was about to crack. In that quiet moment before the real fight began, he thought back to the sign at the neighborhood entrance, "Where neighbors are family," and wondered what kind of family takes you to court over a porch flag. He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and stared out at the dark street. Somewhere out there, Brent was already planning his next move. Alex would be ready. The compliance review should have been the end of it. Alex had walked into the community hall expecting a list of minor corrections and walked out with a warning shot disguised as paperwork. For a day or two afterward, he tried to convince himself it was just a misunderstanding. He mowed the lawn, played catch with his kids, and grilled burgers for dinner. But under the surface, the neighborhood's grip was tightening. The first escalation arrived as a fine, an official envelope stamped urgent. Inside, a neatly formatted notice accused Alex of violating 3 separate rules: unapproved porch decor, the flag, unauthorized landscaping, the wildflowers, and improper storage of equipment, the backyard shed still waiting for approval. The total came to $750, payable within 15 days. Failure to pay, the letter warned, would result in further action up to and including property liens. Alex stared at the number. It wasn't crippling, but it was punitive. The rules cited were vague, their evidence, a single grainy photograph of his porch taken at night. He felt the anger rising, the kind of cold anger he used to feel when a client tried to sneak a clause into a contract. Sarah read the notice twice. "This is insane," she said. "We're not criminals." Alex nodded, folding the paper carefully. "They're testing us," he murmured. "If we pay, it's an admission. If we fight, they'll escalate." 2 days later, escalation arrived on foot. Alex was trimming the hedge when a white SUV pulled up to the curb. Out stepped a man and a woman in matching polos embroidered with the HOA logo, compliance officers. They introduced themselves without smiling and began photographing his property from multiple angles, jotting notes. When Alex asked what they were doing, the man replied flatly, "Routine inspection." Then, as if reading from a script, he added, "Any interference may be considered obstruction." Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Sarah ushered the kids inside. Alex stayed rooted, clippers in hand, heart pounding. The officers finished their inspection and drove off without another word, leaving tire tracks on the street like a signature. That night Alex documented everything: dates, times, names, and photos. He created a folder on his laptop labeled HOA. It was starting to look like a case file. The following week, Brent himself appeared at the Carter porch. No clipboard this time, just a manila envelope. "Mr. Carter," he said with practiced warmth, "we need to resolve these issues before they escalate further." Alex invited him to sit, but Brent declined, standing stiffly like an officer delivering a summons. Inside the envelope was a final notice demanding payment of the fines plus an additional $250 administrative fee. The tone had shifted from polite to legalistic. Alex kept his voice calm. "I've appealed each notice in writing. I haven't received a single response." Brent's smile didn't falter. "Appeals are processed at the board's discretion." Alex held his gaze. "Then process them." Brent glanced at the flag still hanging on the porch. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said softly and turned to go. Sarah watched from the window. "He's threatening us," she whispered. Alex felt it too. Something in Brent's tone had changed, less like a neighbor, more like a warning. Within days, new letters arrived. Each was more aggressive than the last. One accused Alex of harassment for questioning the compliance officers. Another threatened to suspend his family's access to the community pool and playground. A third hinted at legal remedies. At the same time, petty inconveniences began to pile up. The streetlight outside their house went out and wasn't repaired. Sarah's parking pass was suddenly invalid. Packages disappeared from the porch. When Alex called the HOA office, no one answered. When he emailed, responses came from a generic address with no signature. It was like being slowly erased from the neighborhood he'd worked so hard to join. Yet Alex refused to back down. He started attending board meetings, bringing copies of every notice, and citing the bylaws out loud. Other residents began whispering after meetings, slipping him notes about their own fines and inspections. Patterns emerged: Brent targeting certain families, selective enforcement of rules, and fines used as revenue. Alex collected it all like a prosecutor building a case. One evening, as he returned from work, he found a neon orange tag stapled to his front door: "Immediate action required." The tag accused him of storing hazardous materials in his garage, an outright fabrication. Sarah's hands shook as she ripped it down. "They're trying to scare us," she said. "What if they take our house?" Alex folded the tag, placed it in the folder, and said quietly, "They're overplaying their hand." That night he stayed up past midnight researching state HOA laws, reading case after case of homeowners pushed to the brink. Some had won, but only after months of public exposure or legal pressure. He wondered how far Brent would go if challenged. As summer deepened, the neighborhood's cheerful veneer began to crack. Where once neighbors had waved, now they averted their eyes. The same people who'd shared cookies and barbecue recipes now hurried past Alex's yard. Fear hung over Maplewood estates like humidity, thick, invisible, suffocating. One afternoon, Alex found Carla, the neighbor who had warned him, packing boxes into a moving truck. "We're leaving," she whispered. "It's not worth it." He wanted to ask what had happened, but the look in her eyes said enough. Another family gone. Another silent cautionary tale. That night, after Sarah and the kids were asleep, Alex sat on the porch alone. The street was quiet except for the hiss of sprinklers. Across the way, Brent stood under a streetlight, phone pressed to his ear, watching. He didn't wave this time. He just stared until Alex went back inside. Alex closed the door and leaned against it, pulse hammering. He realized the game had shifted. This wasn't about enforcing rules anymore. This was about intimidation. And intimidation was a language Alex understood. He turned off the lights, opened his folder of documents, and began drafting a plan. The flag on the porch fluttered in the night air, a small act of defiance against a system tightening like a noose. When his phone buzzed with a new email, he glanced at the screen. It was from an anonymous address with the subject line, "You're not the only one." He opened it. Inside was a single line, "They did it to me too. Call me," followed by a phone number. Alex stared at the message, heart racing. Somewhere in the neighborhood, someone else was ready to talk. Maybe even fight back. He reached for his phone. Fade out. The anonymous email burned on Alex's screen like a flare in the dark. "You're not the only one." 4 days he'd felt isolated, singled out. Now someone else had confirmed what he suspected. The HOA's tactics weren't random. They were a system. He waited until Sarah had taken the kids to the park before dialing the number. On the third ring a woman answered in a whisper. "This line isn't safe. Meet me at the coffee shop outside the subdivision, back corner." Then she hung up. 2 hours later Alex slid into a booth opposite a tired-looking woman in her 40s clutching a manila folder. She introduced herself as Dana. Her story tumbled out in fragments. Her backyard garden deemed non-conforming, her car towed from her own driveway, fines escalating until she'd been threatened with foreclosure. She'd moved out 3 months ago, but she'd kept everything: letters, photos, and even recordings of Brent's phone calls. She slid the folder across the table. "They count on people giving up," she said. "They don't know what to do when someone fights." Alex leafed through the documents. Each page mirrored his own experience. Dates, notices, vague accusations, selective enforcement. Patterns overlapped like fingerprints. He felt a chill. "How many others?" he asked. Dana gave a grim smile. "More than you think. They're scared to talk. But if you push back, they'll come for you harder." Back home, Alex spread Dana's evidence across his desk beside his own. Together they formed a paper wall of intimidation. Sarah walked in, eyes wide. Where did all this come from? He told her about Dana, about the pattern. For the first time Sarah's worry hardened into anger. "We can't let them do this," she said. "Not just to us, to everyone." The next HOA board meeting was 3 nights later. Alex arrived early, armed with copies of both his and Dana's files. The hall buzzed with low conversation. Brent sat at the podium, expression calm but watchful. When Alex's turn to speak came, he didn't raise his voice. He simply laid out the evidence: dates, fines, photos, and quotes from the bylaws themselves. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brent's smile never wavered. "Your time is up," he said smoothly. "This meeting is adjourned." He banged the gavel and walked out. Residents looked at each other, confused, but no one spoke. Alex left the hall to find a slip of paper under his windshield wiper. "You're making a mistake." No signature. That night the retaliation began in earnest. The next morning a citation for unsafe fencing appeared on his door. The day after that, a bill for community legal costs related to his disruptive behavior. Then a certified letter arrived threatening to place a lien on his property if outstanding violations weren't remedied. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the letter. "This is how they take people's homes," she said. Alex wrapped an arm around her. "Not ours." He called Dana. She wasn't surprised. "They're trying to break you," she said. "If you don't pay, they'll file. If you do pay, they'll bleed you dry. Either way, they win." That night Alex couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table staring at the stack of notices. Every envelope felt heavier than the last. He thought of Carla packing her boxes, of Dana's whisper at the coffee shop, and of the children playing in the sprinkler while the board plodded inside the hall. Then he opened his laptop and began typing. Not an email this time, but a public post. He described the fines, the inspections, and the anonymous threats and uploaded redacted copies of the documents. Within hours the post spread on local forums. Comments flooded in, some sympathetic, some angry, and some sharing their own stories of HOA abuse. A small but vocal group began urging Alex to stand his ground. The next morning Brent appeared on his porch again, this time without even pretending to be friendly. "You've crossed a line," he said quietly. "Take down the post." Alex stood in the doorway, folder in hand. "No." Brent's eyes narrowed. "Then you'll leave me no choice." He turned and walked away, his dog trotting behind him. 2 days later, Alex came home to find a large sign planted in his yard, "Property in violation, under review." Bright red letters, visible from the street. Neighbors slowed their cars to stare. Children whispered on bicycles. Sarah yanked the sign out and threw it on the driveway, tears in her eyes. "They're humiliating us," she said. Alex hugged her, fury building like a storm. That night another email arrived from Dana. Subject line, "You're on the right track. But be careful." Attached was a screenshot of a private HOA board chat she'd somehow accessed. Messages from Brent and others discussing, making an example of Alex, speculating about ways to fast-track legal action. Alex stared at the screen, pulse racing. It was proof of a campaign, not just enforcement, but retaliation. He printed the chat logs, added them to his file, and sat back. For the first time in weeks, the fear was mixed with something else, strategy. Years in boardrooms had taught him that exposure is power. And now he had the beginnings of leverage. Outside, the street lay quiet under the sodium lamps. But Alex could feel eyes on him from behind the blinds. Maplewood Estates had stopped pretending to be a family. It was a battlefield now, and the next move was his. Fade out. For the first time since the notices began, Alex woke up feeling less like a target and more like a fighter. He had the chat logs, Dana's folder, and a growing online audience watching Maplewood's every move. But the HOA wasn't retreating. It was doubling down. On Monday morning a courier delivered a thick envelope marked, "Notice of Intent to Lien." The letterhead looked official enough to scare anyone. In bold, legal-sounding language, it demanded thousands of dollars in unpaid assessments and warned of immediate legal recourse. Sarah's face went pale as she read it. "This isn't just intimidation anymore," she whispered. "They're trying to take the house." Alex folded the paper carefully, jaw clenched. Not without a fight. That evening he attended another board meeting, this time recording everything on his phone. He asked pointed questions. Why were citations issued without inspections? Why were fines inconsistent? Why were homeowners charged legal costs for simply asking questions? Brent's answers were vague, his smile tighter than ever. When Alex held up the printed chat logs and read a snippet aloud, "Make an example of him," gasps rippled through the room. Brent's gavel came down hard. "This meeting is over," he barked. The lights flickered off as residents muttered and filed out. Several slipped Alex their numbers, whispering "call me" on their way past. Outside in the parking lot, Alex felt the wind shift. People were no longer just watching, they were choosing sides. That night, messages poured into his inbox, stories from other residents about petty citations, lost appeals, and threats of liens. Some offered sworn statements. Others simply said, "Thank you for speaking up." Alex compiled everything into a spreadsheet. Patterns emerged like a crime map. He began drafting a formal complaint to the state's Homeowner Association Oversight Office and reaching out to local reporters. His days turned into a blur of emails, phone calls, and scanning documents. Sarah handled the kids, fielded nervous questions from neighbors at the playground, and kept the mood steady at home. But at night, when the children were asleep, her own anxiety spilled out. "They're powerful," she said. "What if we lose?" Alex squeezed her hand. "We already lost our peace. I'm not losing our home." The HOA counterattacked by tightening the screws. Anonymous violations appeared in neighbors' mailboxes accusing Alex of harassment. Rumors spread that his family was behind on dues and that he'd vandalized community property. Someone even posted his address on a local gossip page with a caption, "Troublemaker." When Sarah saw it, she burst into tears. Alex pulled the post up on his laptop, took screenshots, and added it to his growing evidence file. "Every lie is another nail in their coffin," he told her. But inside, he could feel the toll, the late nights, the tension, the cold stares when he walked the dog. One Thursday afternoon, returning from work, Alex noticed a strange car idling near his driveway. As he approached, it pulled away slowly. On his porch sat a package with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, "You can't win." No signature, no logo. Just those words. He locked the door, scanned the note, and called Dana. She urged him to stay calm. "They're trying to rattle you," she said. "It means you're hurting them." The following weekend, Alex organized a private meeting at a neighbor's garage. 12 homeowners showed up. They sat on folding chairs, sipping coffee, their faces a mixture of fear and relief. One by one they shared their stories: fines for holiday decorations, threats for minor landscaping changes, and outrageous legal fees. By the end of the night they'd formed a loose coalition. Alex offered to be the point of contact. They exchanged evidence and decided to file a collective grievance. As the group dispersed, Sarah whispered, "This is bigger than us now." 2 days later, a local news crew parked at the entrance of Maplewood Estates. The anchor interviewed Alex by the community sign, his stack of documents held like a shield. Brent refused to comment. The segment aired that night under the headline, "Homeowners Say HOA Abuses Power." Social media lit up. Comments flooded the HOA's official page. For the first time, the board had lost control of the narrative. But victory felt distant. The next morning, Alex received a certified letter announcing a formal hearing to revoke his community privileges and assess emergency legal fees. In effect, they were trying to expel him. Sarah sat at the kitchen table reading the letter aloud, her voice cracking. "They're escalating because they're cornered," Alex said. "But we'll show everything at the hearing." He spent the following nights preparing like a lawyer, cross-referencing bylaws, printing exhibits, and tabbing pages. The children watched cartoons while their father turned the dining room into a war room of manila folders and sticky notes. Each citation became a puzzle piece. Each email a breadcrumb. He built a timeline spanning 2 years of selective enforcement. He highlighted contradictions in the board's own documents. He rehearsed his opening statement aloud until the words felt like steel. The night before the hearing, a storm rolled over Maplewood Estates. Rain streaked the windows. Sarah found Alex at the table, still working. "Come to bed," she said softly. He looked up, exhaustion etched on his face but eyes blazing. "Tomorrow they'll see we're not afraid." Outside, lightning flashed over the perfect rows of houses. Inside, the stacks of evidence cast long shadows across the floor. The war between one homeowner and the HOA had reached its breaking point. Fade out on the storm. The morning of the HOA hearing dawned cold and brittle. A thin mist hung over Maplewood Estates, blurring the neat hedges and spotless driveways. Alex rose before dawn, slipped his evidence binders into a battered leather briefcase, and buttoned the same suit he'd worn at his first job interview. Today wasn't just about fines or citations. It was about survival. Sarah kissed his cheek at the door, eyes shimmering. "No matter what they say, don't let them see you flinch," she whispered. Alex nodded and walked out into the mist. The hearing took place not in a courthouse but in the HOA's clubhouse, a converted community center with folding chairs and fluorescent lights. Yet the atmosphere felt like a tribunal. Brent sat at the head of a long table with 2 other board members on either side. A hired attorney with a gray briefcase occupied the corner, scrolling on a tablet. Several residents filled the back row, whispering. A camera crew from the local news station had also slipped in, their lens quietly humming. Alex took his seat at the opposite table, placed his briefcase down, and met Brent's gaze. For the first time, Brent didn't smile. The attorney began reading a litany of alleged violations in a measured monotone: non-compliant fencing, disruptive conduct at meetings, and public defamation of board members. Each charge carried fines and legal assessments that, when added together, approached the value of a small car. The goal was obvious: bury Alex under paperwork until he broke. When the attorney finished, Brent leaned forward. "Mr. Carter," he said, "this community functions on rules. You've made a sport of breaking them." Alex opened his folders slowly. "I haven't broken rules," he said. "I've exposed abuse." Then, one by one, he laid out the documents: dated notices, photographs, contradictory citations, the chat logs Dana had sent, and sworn statements from neighbors. He spoke calmly, letting the evidence speak louder than anger. Murmurs spread through the room as pages slid across the table. The news camera zoomed in on the printouts. A board member on Brent's left shifted uncomfortably. The attorney whispered something and began tapping notes on his tablet. Brent rapped his knuckles on the table. "This is irrelevant." Alex interrupted. "These are your own words. Make an example of him." He read the line aloud. "This isn't enforcement. It's retaliation." Gasps rose from the residents at the back. The board attempted to adjourn, but the presence of the camera and the crowd kept them pinned in their seats. For the first time, Brent's composure cracked. A flush crept up his neck. He muttered to the attorney, who gathered the files with stiff fingers. Then a voice from the back row: "He's right." Another resident stood up holding a copy of his own citation. "They fined me for a flower pot." A second voice joined. "They threatened to tow my car." Within minutes, a chorus of complaints filled the room. The fragile order of Maplewood's regime trembled on its foundation. Brent slammed the gavel. "This hearing is suspended." He rose, but the camera's red light blinked steadily. Alex remained seated, calm, his binder still open. "Walk away if you want," he said softly. "But the truth's already out." The board members filed out without another word, leaving the attorney to scoop up the papers and follow. Residents crowded around Alex, some clapping him on the back, others pressing envelopes of evidence into his hands. Sarah slipped in from the doorway, tears of relief cutting tracks through her makeup. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." But Alex knew it wasn't over. Lawsuits moved slowly, and Brent still controlled the day-to-day machinery of the HOA. The liens, the rumors, and the intimidation could continue. He'd won the hearing, but the war wasn't finished. That night, back at home, he found a final message slid under his door: "Enjoy your victory. It won't last." No signature. He read it aloud to Sarah, then fed it into the shredder. "They're running out of moves," he said, though a flicker of unease lingered in his eyes. "Sooner or later, they'll have to answer to someone bigger than themselves." In the following days, the local news segment went viral, picked up by a regional station and shared widely online. Emails poured in from homeowners across the state describing similar abuses. Alex began forwarding everything to the oversight agency and a sympathetic attorney who'd reached out after seeing the broadcast. A civil investigation loomed. Meanwhile, Maplewood Estates felt different. Neighbors who had once shut their blinds now waved when Alex passed. Some offered to mow his lawn, others brought casseroles, small gestures of solidarity. Children chalked "Stay Strong" on the sidewalk outside his driveway. Yet, amid the support, Alex noticed unmarked cars cruising past, anonymous accounts sending him veiled threats, and a sense that the old power wasn't gone, just wounded. Late one night he sat at the kitchen table again, staring at the mountain of paperwork, thinking of the next step. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was building a case that could reshape how HOAs operated statewide. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. A sudden noise outside snapped him back. He looked through the blinds and saw Brent's dog trotting down the street alone, no leash, no owner in sight. The street lamp flickered overhead. For a moment Alex wondered if Brent was still pulling strings in the dark, or if the man who had ruled Maplewood for years was finally losing his grip. He closed the blinds and exhaled. The climax of this battle was coming, and when it hit, it would be public, messy, and impossible for the board to hide. Fade out on the quiet house with its stacks of evidence, the storm clouds gathering just beyond the perfect cul-de-sac. The morning of the state oversight hearing felt nothing like the clubhouse trials Alex had endured before. This was downtown, a real government building with marble floors and echoing corridors, not folding chairs under fluorescent bulbs. He walked up the granite steps flanked by Sarah and two neighbors carrying bankers' boxes of evidence. Reporters swarmed outside, microphones already out. For the first time, Brent and the board couldn't control the setting. Inside, the room buzzed like a courtroom drama. A three-person panel from the state agency sat behind a raised dais. Rows of seats were filled with Maplewood residents, curious onlookers, and cameras from local stations. At one table, Alex stacked his files like fortifications. At the other, Brent arrived with two attorneys in crisp suits, clutching binders stamped confidential. He looked smaller without his neighborhood backdrop, but his eyes still burned with defiance. The panel chair's gavel cracked once. "We are convened to hear complaints regarding Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association versus Alexander Carter and other residents. Mr. Carter, you may begin." Alex rose. His voice shook only for the first few words. Then training, preparation, and months of anger fused into clarity. He projected emails, photos, and spreadsheets onto a screen, contradictory citations, illegal fees, and the chat logs where Brent wrote about making an example of him. Gasps rippled through the audience. The panelists leaned forward, taking notes. One of Brent's attorneys objected, but the chair held up a hand. "Overruled. Continue." Alex pressed on, telling Dana's story, Carla's foreclosure threat, and the parade of homeowners fined into silence. "This isn't about one lawn or one fence," he said. "This is about abuse of power, retaliation, and the weaponization of bylaws against the very people they're supposed to protect." He ended by holding up a final exhibit, a notarized affidavit from a former board secretary attesting that Brent had ordered staff to flag and escalate any complaints from Alex and his allies. The room went still. The panel chair cleared her throat. "Mr. Carter, please submit that document for the record." Across the table, Brent's face darkened. He whispered urgently to his lawyers. One of them rose, attempting to pivot to community standards and rule enforcement, but the words landed flat. The cameras captured every bead of sweat on Brent's forehead. Sarah squeezed Alex's arm under the table. He could feel her trembling. Months of sleepless nights and fear had brought them here, to this moment when the board's power finally met a higher authority. Then, just as Alex prepared his closing line, Brent stood up abruptly. "This is a smear campaign," he snapped. "This man is trying to destroy Maplewood Estates." The chair banged the gavel. "Sir, you will sit down or be removed." But Brent's voice rose, cracking. "He's lying." His attorney tugged at his sleeve, whispering. Cameras zoomed in. The HOA president, who once ruled the neighborhood with cold smiles, now looked like a cornered animal. Alex didn't smile. He simply slid the last photo across, the yard sign, "Property in violation, under review," photographed alongside the chat log ordering "public humiliation tactics." It was the smoking gun. The panel chair read the excerpt aloud, her voice even. Murmurs swelled into a low roar from the audience. The chair called a recess. Brent stalked out with his lawyers, cameras following. Residents crowded around Alex, some crying, some clapping him on the back. Sarah hugged him hard. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "you already won." Alex sat back down, palms flat on the cool table, heart hammering. He knew the board would try another trick during the break. He knew the second half of the hearing could still bring surprises. But for the first time, the burden felt lighter. He wasn't alone anymore. The people of Maplewood, and now the whole city, were watching. When the panel returned, the chair's expression was unreadable. "We will now allow the association to present its defense." Brent's attorneys rose, but Brent himself stayed seated, staring at the table. The tide had shifted, and everyone in the room could feel it. Fade out on Alex's steady gaze and the buzz of whispered conversations. The peak tension before the decision. The room was different when the panel returned from recess. The murmurs were louder, the reporters closer to the front. Brent had retreated into a corner of the table, his lawyers whispering furiously. Alex felt the tension coiling tighter. This was the point where the HOA usually crushed people with procedure, but here, in a real government forum with cameras rolling, that old advantage was gone. Brent's lead attorney stood and tried to sound calm. He talked about uniform enforcement and community values, flipping through thick binders. He insisted the citations were routine and the fees justified. He called Alex a serial violator who had inflamed neighbors for his own agenda. The words echoed off the marble but landed with a dull thud. Each claim Alex had already disproven with documents on the record. When the panel asked specific questions, why do the minutes of your board meetings omit these fines? Why was Mr. Carter's name singled out in private emails? The lawyer hedged. The second panelist leaned forward. Are you aware that selective enforcement is a violation of state HOA statute section 112? The attorney's composure slipped for the first time. He asked for clarification, stalling. Then, in a moment that felt scripted by fate, a man rose from the back row, the former board secretary whose affidavit Alex had submitted. He stepped to the microphone. "I can clarify," he said. "I took those minutes, and I was told to alter them." The room exploded with gasps. Cameras swung toward him. "Brent ordered me to remove references to Mr. Carter's appeals," he continued. "He also told me to shred letters from homeowners who supported him." Brent half rose, his face crimson. "He's disgruntled," he began, but the panel chair's gavel cut him off. "You will remain seated." The secretary held up a flash drive. "I saved everything." Sarah clutched Alex's arm. The flash drive glinted under the lights like a key in a lock. One panelist signaled to a staffer, who took it into evidence. "We'll enter this as Exhibit 27, the chair said. "Mr. Carter, please continue." Alex didn't even need to. The room's energy had shifted completely. Residents in the back row whispered, some filming on their phones. The HOA's aura of control, the rules, the fines, the threats, had dissolved under sunlight. The lead attorney tried one last gambit, accusing Alex of harassment for posting HOA emails online. But Alex calmly produced a letter from the state's Open Records Division confirming his right to share non-confidential documents. He handed copies to the panel. The attorney's face fell. Brent's hands trembled on the table. Then the third panelist spoke for the first time. "President Harding," she said, addressing Brent directly. "Did you or did you not authorize the placement of public violation signs in Mr. Carter's yard without prior due process?" Brent stared at her, mouth opening and closing. The room held its breath. "You don't recall," he muttered. "Would it refresh your memory," the panelist asked coolly, "if I played a recording?" She nodded to a technician, who pressed a button. Brent's own voice filled the chamber. "Put the sign up. Make sure the neighbors see it. He'll fold faster if he's humiliated." The audio was crisp and undeniable. A collective gasp swept through the audience like a wave. Brent slumped back in his chair, his attorneys frantically scribbling notes. Alex sat still, heart pounding but face composed. Months of sleepless nights, threats, and fines had led to this moment, the truth echoing through marble walls. The panel chair adjusted her glasses. "This board will recess again for 15 minutes to deliberate preliminary measures." She banged the gavel. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged toward Alex. Sarah wrapped both arms around him. "It's over," she whispered. He wasn't sure yet, but he felt something break loose inside him, a weight lifting. As Brent stalked out flanked by his attorneys, residents rose spontaneously and applauded Alex. Some reached over the rail to shake his hand. Dana appeared at his shoulder, eyes shining. "You did it," she said. "You finally made them answer." Alex sat back down, breathing hard. He looked at the flash drive now in state custody, the printed chat logs on the table, and the faces of neighbors who'd once been silent now smiling at him. The battle wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been bullied by a petty board drunk on power. Outside, through the tall windows, the noon sun had burned away the morning mist. Maplewood Estates was just another subdivision down the road, but inside this room, the walls of its regime were cracking. Fade out on Alex staring straight ahead as the panel deliberates, the sound of muffled voices behind closed doors, the tension of a verdict hanging in the air. The deliberation room's double doors stayed shut for what felt like hours. In reality, it was 22 minutes, but Alex counted every second. Each tick of the clock echoed through the chamber like a drum roll. Reporters whispered into their phones. Residents shifted in the rows. Even Sarah, usually unshakable, gnawed at her lip. Somewhere behind those doors, the panel was deciding the fate of Maplewood's most powerful man and of Alex's family. Then the doors swung open. The three panelists filed back to the dais, faces unreadable. The chair rapped her gavel once. "This board has reached its interim findings," she announced. The entire room held its breath. "Based on testimony, documentary evidence, and the newly submitted electronic records," she continued, "we find prima facie evidence of gross misconduct, selective enforcement, and violation of State HOA Statute Section 112 by the Maplewood Estates Board under the direction of President Brent Harding." A shockwave of murmurs rolled through the chamber. "Accordingly, we are issuing a cease and desist order halting all enforcement actions against Mr. Carter pending a full audit and referring the matter to the Attorney General's office for potential prosecution." Alex's knees nearly gave way. Sarah gripped his hand so hard it hurt. Across the room Brent stiffened, then shot to his feet. "This is a witch hunt," he bellowed, face blotched crimson. "You have no authority." The chair's gavel cracked again. "Sit down, Mr. Harding. Continued outbursts will be noted." Brent's attorneys tried to hustle him back into his seat, but he shook them off, turning on the audience. "You're all ungrateful. You think you can run this community without me?" he shouted. "It'll collapse without rules." From the back row someone called out, "Without corruption, you mean?" The room erupted in applause. Reporters surged forward, capturing every second. Brent spun toward Alex, eyes burning. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "This isn't over." Alex rose slowly, every movement deliberate. For months he'd imagined what he would say at this moment. He kept his voice calm but carried it across the chamber. "It's over for people who think power means abusing neighbors. Not for the rest of us." The words weren't planned. They came from somewhere deeper, raw, and certain. The room went silent, then broke into cheers. Security moved between Brent and Alex as the panel gathered its papers. The chair leaned into the microphone. "We will issue a full written report within 10 business days. Until then, the Board of Maplewood Estates is enjoined from imposing any further fines, liens, or signage on Mr. Carter's property. This hearing is adjourned." She struck the gavel one last time. Brent tried to storm out, but the corridor was already clogged with cameras. A reporter's mic caught his shoulder. "Mr. Harding, did you order records destroyed?" someone shouted. "Do you have a comment on the audio recording?" Another called. He shoved past them, muttering curses, his lawyers trailing like wreckage. Inside the chamber, neighbors swarmed Alex and Sarah. Some apologized for staying silent. Others thanked him for standing up to the bullies. Dana hugged him hard. "They can't touch you now," she whispered. "You turned the tables." But Alex's eyes were still on the dais, where staffers boxed up exhibits. The flash drive, the chat logs, and the damning recording. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was evidence moving into the state's hands. He realized Maplewood's saga might become a test case for every HOA in the state. Outside the building, the midday sun hit like a spotlight. Reporters crowded the steps. "Mr. Carter, how do you feel? What's next for you and your family?" Alex shielded Sarah as they moved down the stairs. "One step at a time," he said, but his voice trembled with adrenaline. Halfway to the parking lot, a black SUV screeched to a halt. Brent burst from the back seat. No attorneys now, just raw fury. "You've ruined everything," he yelled, advancing. Security guards who had followed Alex from the building stepped between them. "Sir, back away," one ordered. Brent pointed a shaking finger. "You think the state can save you? I know people. You'll regret this." Alex felt a surge of old fear, but it broke like a wave and left something steadier. He met Brent's eyes without flinching. "Threats won't work anymore," he said. "Not here. Not now." Brent hesitated, then spat on the pavement and retreated into the SUV. Tires squealed, leaving a stench of burned rubber. Cameras caught it all. Later that night the clip would go viral. HOA president melts down on courthouse steps, drawing millions of views and hundreds of furious comments from homeowners around the country. As Alex and Sarah finally reached their car, Sarah turned to him. "It's really happening, isn't it?" He looked back at the courthouse, at the windows where sunlight glinted off the sealed exhibits. "It's happening," he said. But inside he knew the fight wasn't entirely over. There would be audits, lawsuits, and interviews. Yet for the first time in months, he felt air in his lungs again. He had stood up to the bully and survived. The camera, and your story, would linger on that image. Alex and Sarah in the parking lot, wind tugging at their clothes, Brent's SUV a shrinking speck down the road, the courthouse behind them. The peak of the storm had passed, but what would come after was still unwritten. Fade out on Alex's face, not triumphant exactly, but resolute, eyes fixed on the horizon as though already seeing the next battle. Cliffhanger line: "Maplewood would never be the same, but neither would I." The drive back into Maplewood that afternoon felt like crossing an invisible border. For months every turn of these streets had carried a weight. The painted curbs, the identical mailboxes, and the watchful eyes behind curtains. Today, for the first time, Alex saw open blinds and neighbors on their porches. Some waved as his car passed. Others simply nodded, expressions a mixture of relief and awe. Word of the hearing had traveled faster than the SUV's tires squealed out of the courthouse. At home, Sarah unlocked the front door and exhaled as though she'd been holding her breath for a year. The yard that had once been littered with warning signs was bare. The stakes still left faint holes in the grass, but the sight of open space felt like sunlight after a storm. Alex dropped his files on the kitchen table and just stood, listening to the quiet. No envelopes tucked under the mat. No clipboard-wielding volunteers circling the street. That evening, the first email arrived. Not from the HOA, but from a neighbor he'd never met. "Thank you. We were scared to speak up. You gave us courage." Others followed, 30, 40, then 100 messages from people in Maplewood and across the state. Homeowners who'd been fined for trivialities, harassed over mailbox paint, and dragged into liens for yard art. They wrote of sleepless nights, of humiliation, of feeling powerless. Alex read them aloud to Sarah until his voice cracked. Within days, the state panel's cease and desist order became headline news. Local TV ran clips of the flash drive being entered into evidence and the audio of Brent ordering public humiliation. Social media dubbed it HOA-gate. 1 million views in 48 hours. Comments poured in. "Finally someone stood up. This gives me hope. I'm sharing this with my HOA." The story had escaped Maplewood and become a symbol. Inside the subdivision, something shifted. Neighbors who had whispered behind closed doors now spoke openly. They organized informal meetings in living rooms, comparing notes about fines and intimidation. Dana started a private Facebook group called Maplewood Without Fear that was filled with screenshots of old citations, meeting notices, and pictures of Brent's notorious violation signs. For the first time, Alex saw posts from families he'd never known existed in the cul-de-sacs, all telling similar stories. Meanwhile, state investigators moved quickly. They arrived at the HOA office with warrants for digital backups, board minutes, and financial statements. Residents watched as boxes were carried out, past the sign that once read, "Private property, HOA staff only." Someone snapped a photo of the scene and posted it online. It went viral with the caption, "The day the bullies were audited." Alex and Sarah tried to settle back into normal routines, but normal had changed. News crews knocked at their door. A homeowners' rights nonprofit asked Alex to speak at a town hall. Even his boss, who had once worried about the distraction, congratulated him on exposing a rotten system. At night Alex lay awake, not with fear now but with adrenaline, replaying the hearing in his head, the moment the recording played, the flash drive glinting under the lights. The HOA, stripped of its usual power, scrambled. With Brent suspended pending investigation, the board tried to appoint an interim president. But attendance at meetings soared, and residents demanded open elections instead. A petition circulated calling for bylaws reform, limits on fines, and recall of all current board members. Alex signed it but kept a low profile, letting others take the lead. "It can't just be me," he told Sarah. "If Maplewood's going to change, it has to be everybody." One evening, as twilight settled over the subdivision, a knock came at the door. It was an older couple from 3 streets over. "We just wanted to thank you," the woman said, clutching a homemade pie. "We've lived here 20 years. We thought we'd have to move. You made us believe again." Alex didn't know what to say. He'd started out just trying to protect his family. Somehow that private battle had become public, a catalyst for something larger. Yet under the gratitude was a current of tension. Brent's allies still lurked, neighbors who had benefited from his favoritism or simply feared change. Anonymous posts appeared online calling Alex a troublemaker and a fame-seeker, warning of taxpayer costs from investigations. One night, a car slowed outside their house and someone shouted, "Snitch!" before speeding away. Sarah flinched, but Alex only stared into the dark. After what they'd endured, a drive-by insult felt like a paper cut. The state panel's preliminary report landed in mailboxes 2 weeks later. It confirmed everything: selective enforcement, financial irregularities, and suppression of homeowner appeals. It referred multiple findings to the Attorney General and recommended temporary state oversight of Maplewood's HOA. The language was dry, but its impact was seismic. Residents who had been silent now came forward in droves, filing affidavits and demanding restitution for unjust fines. The night the report dropped, Dana hosted a meeting at her house. Dozens came. People sat on the floor, on stairs, spilling into the kitchen. Alex stayed near the back, watching faces light up as they realized they were not alone. "We're not just fighting Brent anymore," Dana told them. "We're rewriting what this community means." The room erupted in applause. As Alex walked home under the street lamps, he felt a strange mix of exhaustion and possibility. Maplewood's story wasn't finished, but its next chapter would be written by many hands. For the first time since buying their house, he and Sarah could imagine staying, not as subjects of an HOA regime, but as part of a neighborhood reclaiming itself. Back inside, Sarah poured tea and set it on the table between them. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked quietly. Alex thought of the sleepless nights, the fines, the threats, and the courthouse steps. Then he pictured the emails, the pie at the door, and the packed living room at Dana's. He shook his head. "No," he said. "Not if it means this." They sat in silence, the house around them finally feeling like a home again, not a battlefield. Through the window the empty yard looked almost new. In the distance, a dog barked, a sprinkler hissed, ordinary sounds of ordinary life, sounds that had once seemed impossible. Fade out on Alex at the window, neighborhood lights twinkling, a man on the edge of something bigger than himself. Spring, Maplewood no longer looked or felt like the same neighborhood. The manicured sameness remained, the brick facades, the clipped lawns, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Gone were the patrol-like drives of board members with clipboards. Gone were the bright orange violation stakes. In their place, yard sales popped up, children played on sidewalks without parents glancing nervously for rule enforcers, and neighbors greeted one another with something Maplewood hadn't seen in years: trust. The Attorney General's office issued its findings in early March. Brent Harding and 2 former board members were formally charged with tampering with public records and fraud. Financial audits revealed thousands of dollars in fines and fees had been diverted into a special projects fund that no one could account for. The The state froze the HOA's accounts pending restitution. Overnight, the board's power dissolved like sugar in water. A special election was called to rebuild Maplewood's HOA from scratch. Residents who had once dreaded meetings now lined up to vote. Dana chaired a reform committee that drafted new bylaws, caps on fines, clear appeals processes, mandatory open meetings, and term limits for board members. For the first time in its history, Maplewood would be governed by rules its homeowners had actually chosen. Alex declined to run for any position. "I'm not here to be the next Brent," he told Sarah. Instead, he spoke at the first open meeting, standing at the microphone where so many citations had been read into record. "This isn't about replacing one face with another," he said. "It's about remembering why we moved here, to live, not to be policed." The room gave him a standing ovation. The press coverage slowed after the indictments, but the story's echo kept traveling. A homeowners' rights group invited Alex to keynote a statewide conference. He walked onto a hotel ballroom stage to thunderous applause from people who had driven in from every corner of the state. They told him about their own HOAs, the garden gnome band, the wheelchair ramp find, the single mother threatened with foreclosure over a cracked driveway. Alex listened, humbled. His fight had been one story in a much bigger pattern. At home, life settled into something like normal. Sarah's garden, once the subject of unauthorized plantings, citations, bloomed without fear. Neighbors stopped by to trade seedlings. The anonymous insults ceased. Even the couple who had once sided with Brent crossed the street one afternoon with a casserole and an apology. "We were scared," the husband admitted. "You showed us we didn't have to be." But scars remained. Some families moved out rather than wait for restitution. Lawsuits dragged on. Brent posted rants online about tyranny and witch hunts until a judge ordered him silent pending trial. For Alex, the worst nights were the ones when he woke suddenly, heart pounding, imagining another certified letter at the door. It took time for the body to believe the siege was over. Slowly, though, the community began to heal. Children chalked welcome on sidewalks for new neighbors. The HOA's first newsletter under its new board featured not fines but a block party invitation. On a mild April evening, Alex and Sarah walked to the park and saw more than 100 residents gathered under string lights, eating from potluck tables and laughing freely. No clipboards. No security. Just a neighborhood, finally acting like one. As the sun set, Dana climbed onto a bench and raised a glass. "To all of us," she called. "To take back our home." Cheers rippled through the crowd. Alex stood beside Sarah, arm around her shoulders. For a moment he thought of the flash drive, the courtroom audio, and the day everything cracked open. And he realized this, not the headlines or the hearings, was the real victory. Ordinary people reclaiming their ordinary lives. Later that night, sitting on the porch, Sarah asked him what he'd say if he could speak to everyone still living under a heavy-handed HOA. He thought for a long time, listening to crickets and smelling fresh-cut grass. "Don't wait for a hero," he said finally. "Document everything. Stand together. Speak up even when your voice shakes. You're not powerless unless you believe you are." She nodded, eyes shining. The following week a letter arrived from a woman 3 states away. She'd watched the viral clips, started her own petition, and forced her HOA to repeal an abusive lien policy. "You don't know me," she wrote, "but you helped me save my house." Alex pinned it to a corkboard in his office, a quiet reminder of what one fight could spark. Months later, Maplewood held its first annual Neighbor Day. No fines, no speeches, just a picnic and a bonfire. Children ran with sparklers while adults shared stories of the old days, with a shudder and a laugh. As the flames flickered, Alex felt something he hadn't felt since signing his mortgage: belonging. He didn't see himself as a crusader. He saw himself as a homeowner who'd simply refused to be bullied, and discovered that refusal could light a path for others. In the glow of the fire, he thought of everyone still living under unfair boards and wondered how many might take that first step after hearing Maplewood's story. The camera, and your video, would linger on that image, the bonfire reflecting in Alex's eyes, families gathered without fear, a community reborn. The music would swell. Text might appear on screen, In the months since the hearing, Maplewood Estates rewrote its bylaws, held open elections, and refunded $78,000 in illegal fines to homeowners. Then fade to black. Closing line/takeaway. If power can be abused behind closed doors, it can also be dismantled in the open, by ordinary people, together.